This Valentine's Day, celebrate the one you love the most with Hallmark cards at Walgreens. Valentine's Day is the best time to send your favorite person a reminder of just how much they mean to you. A Hallmark card is a super simple and beautiful way to say how grateful you are for the love you two share. Don't forget, Valentine's Day is Saturday, February 14th. Visit Walgreens today to find a Hallmark card that shows just how much you love them. Because love lives here.
Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base, which of course is our goal. I want to speak this morning about one issue and one issue only. I gave a talk yesterday, and in the body of my talk, somebody asked me a question. How do you prepare for your morning broadcast? And I said it's very simple. Whether on the radio or doing this method, Around the Political World with John Rothman as a podcast, I would listen to the news on the radio, flip on the television set to hear what's going on, but most important of all, for me, is reading the newspapers. Now, in the old days, I would read the New York Times, the Washington Post, San Francisco Chronicle, Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune. I wanted to get a mix of what people were thinking, not only in terms of reporting the news, but also in terms of editorial opinion. And of course, I read all the news magazines, Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, National Review, New Republic. I wanted to read left, right, center. I wanted to be as up-to-date as I could. And I always remember my late colleague Gene Burns at KGO, who called me his paper boy, because I would pick up certain newspapers and share certain observations with Gene as he would with me. And because I've always been a political junkie, I've known that one of the newspapers that you must read is the Washington Post. Now, when Katharine Graham and Ben Bradley ran the Washington Post, I knew I was getting something exceptional. And indeed, if you've read The Final Days by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, or their original book, All the President's Men, you know that the insightful reporting from the Washington Post, and from those two reporters in particular, helped to recreate what happened in the United States in terms of politics. They really contributed to the bringing down of a president, Richard Nixon. And we knew that when we read the Washington Post, we were really getting the scoop, so to speak. And so yesterday, we got the news that the Washington Post, owned now by Jeff Bezos, is cutting a third of its staff. They're going to eliminate the sports section. They are going to reduce foreign news coverage. And frankly, it is a disaster, particularly if you live in Washington and you want to know what's going on. The Washington Post laid off 1/3 of its staff. That's right. Now, how do you keep a newspaper going when you lay off 1/3 of the staff? The Post's executive editor, Matt Murray, called this most painful but necessary to put our house in order. He thinks that this will create a stronger, better footing, and, well, that it will make a better newspaper. I want to know what you think. I really do. Because to me, it's a disaster. Let me give you some examples of newspapers that have failed. When I was a kid growing up in San Francisco, we had the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, the San Francisco News, the San Francisco Call Bulletin. We even had a newspaper called the San Francisco Progress. And so we had a variety of newspapers. And of course, there were mergers. The News merged with the Call Bulletin, and it became the News Call Bulletin. And the various changes that took place ultimately resulted in the San Francisco Examiner virtually vanishing. Oh, it exists, but it's not a significant force. And the San Francisco Chronicle, which once was the great newspaper in Northern California, is gone. By the way, same thing with the Oakland Tribune. Once upon a time, the Tribune was a power. Indeed, here in California, where politics matters, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Oakland Tribune, and the Los Angeles Times formed a network of 3 powerful newspapers. But I want you to know, I agree with those who say that this news about the Washington Post is devastating. Can you imagine that we will no longer have in Washington, D.C., a newspaper with comprehensive coverage? Now, of course, it's true. The Post has been bleeding subscribers, in part due to decisions made by Bezos, I believe, including pulling back from an endorsement of Kamala Harris, a Democrat, during the late presidential campaign. But there also is something more about this. The Post's troubles have grown. And when you talk about that contrast to its longtime competitor, the New York Times, which has been thriving in recent years, the reason, in large part due to investments and ancillary products such as games and wire cutter products and, well, all sorts of stuff. But I have to tell you, here we are on the eve of the Super Bowl, and what does the Washington Post do? It's eliminating the sports section. That puts an end to a department of the Post that has hosted many well-known bylines throughout the years and covered major sports events. This, my friends, is a blow to journalism. Not unusual, as I've just demonstrated in San Francisco, but what are the causes? Well, how many people today take ads in newspapers? Not very many. Once upon a time, the thick San Francisco Chronicle, which arrived at our home, was packed with ads, want ads, searching for apartments, personal ads, notices of divorce. It was amazing, but not anymore. And so what has happened is the advertising budgets have been cut. And that was the major income of newspapers. Now what do? You go online. I know that when I'm dealing with rental properties, I don't look at the newspaper. I look at what is online. That's how you find out where there are vacancies and when the showing times are and all the rest. There is something else that the Post has done. They are eliminating their Middle East bureau. Now, the Post is a major newspaper, internationally recognized, and their bureau chiefs in various capitals, well, made all the difference in the world. Can you imagine, with all the breaking news in the Middle East, that the Post is cutting its Middle East coverage? What are we going to look at the Post for? What news will there really be? And if you were a young person wanting to go into media, would you go to a major newspaper? Obviously not. So what does this mean? I want to give you another example. I think it's really important. I've had the opportunity to write several books, and one of them in particular I want to refer to now, a biography of Harold Stassen, an American political figure who ran 10 times for president of the United States. Now, my book, which I collaborated on with Alec Kirby and David Dallin, is the definitive book on Harold Stassen. And there were several sections which I wrote. And where did I get my information? From news clippings. Now, somebody said to me, well, can't you just go online and get this information? And the answer is no. I would never have been able to complete the work that I was doing had I not taken a scissor and used that scissor to clip articles out of the newspaper. What we are going to find now is a reduction in newspaper availability. less coverage. And of course, we have an unrelenting war by Donald Trump and his administration against anyone who opposes him or anyone who is perceived as an opponent. And what we're seeing is that, unfortunately, people like Jeff Bezos, multi-millionaires, are essentially making the decision to play ball with the administration. The Post, we are told, will concentrate on areas that demonstrate authority, distinctiveness, and impact. And I think that's a fascinating approach. But how do you do it if you don't have a workforce, if you don't have reporters? And I must say, this is extremely distressing to me. I could not do my daily podcasts with you, nor could I have worked for almost 3 decades on the radio without having access to news, diverse news. Look at the opinion section of the Washington Post. It's no longer an opinion section. It's pablum. If there were a major crisis, and there are many major crises in this country, if there were a major crisis, would there be a Woodward or a Bernstein who could not only cover the story, but do it intelligently? I am deeply disturbed by this cutting of the Washington Post. By the way, although the New York Times is still a very good paper, it's not the paper that it was. These are serious questions about information. And when you see major changes taking place at CBS, ABC, and NBC, when you see even in the area of Fox and CNN and other cable news operations, major cuts taking place, it's disturbing, because how will we get our information? I'm currently teaching a course on Edward R. Murrow, and I'm watching a lot of the old CBS tapes. One of them was the World in Review. And at the end of December, beginning of January, Murrow would summon reporters from all over the world who covered trouble spots, interesting places, and put them in a room and talk about what was going on in the world. You can't do that anymore. And this, to me, is horrific. Let me point out to you that the Washington Post has been very aggressive in coverage of Trump's changes to the federal workforce. They have covered a lot of the big stories in the Trump administration. But how are they going to do it in the future? There are business areas that need to be addressed. And it was pointed out that Jeff Bezos, this a direct quote from one of the leading media involved people, is gutless. Gutless. Now, what are loyal listeners to the Washington Post going to do? I'll bet they start canceling their subscriptions. Now, what happens when newspapers' subscriptions drop? Well, there isn't enough money. And without enough money, you can't run a newspaper. So all of the sports fans, for instance, who read the Washington Post aren't going to have a sports section anymore. I am talking about this today, although there are a million things that I could talk about. But I believe the decision by Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post to cut a third of its staff is not only a blow to a legendary newspaper, it means that we, who rely on newspapers and reporters for information, are going to be out in the cold. This is very important. And let me assure you that this is just the beginning of major cuts. Now, one of my dear friends with whom I discussed this said to me, well, don't worry, John, they'll just restructure. There'll be a different way to get the news out. Maybe, but will it be as accurate, as precise? Will you be able to really get a sense of what's going on? And if the Post and other newspapers begin cutting foreign correspondents, how will we really know what's going on in the world? This is a decisive move by the Post. It is one I regret profoundly. And I want to be clear this morning. It's not that I'm old-fashioned. It is that I know what it takes to be involved in the news business. So I'm mourning the Washington Post. I'm wondering what Katharine Graham and Ben Bradlee, now deceased, would think. They'd be rolling over in their graves. And what about Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein? What are we going to do to keep the flow of news going? It's a serious question. I'm talking just about print media. We've talked in the past about television media. We've talked about Barry Weiss going over to CBS and the impact there. This, my friends, is critical, because if we don't have access to news, we're in trouble. And when a reporter like Don Lemon can be arrested by the federal government, by the Justice Department, we've got a real problem. So I'm mourning the demise of a great newspaper, the Washington Post. Legendary. But we are going to survive. The news media will still be covering things, but not as effectively, in my judgment. I hope I'm proven wrong. All right, that's my commentary this morning, and I felt it was important to raise these issues with you. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can write a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify. Click any of the links to the show notes to connect with me on social media. Please remember that Friday, tomorrow, I will be answering questions. I'll do a 15-minute segment, but you need to let me know your questions. Gogo Zoger, the producer of this podcast, is going over those questions. She will submit them to me, and I will have an opportunity to chat with you about them. So throw your questions in. We'll do our best to answer them. And please remember to share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand. This show's been getting so much positive attention that we've added advertisers. We've had a number of inquiries. There will be more advertisers. We'll try not to interrupt the flow of the show, because to me, my contact with you is what is critical. And so, my friends, that's my commentary today, my observation, many other things we could have talked about. But the cuts at the Washington Post really set me off. Special appreciation to Gogo Zoger. I couldn't do this podcast without Gogo. So, Gogo, you have job security. I am John Rothman. This is Around the Political World with John Rothman. And I will be back tomorrow. Can't wait to see you. Have a great day.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.